Hello, welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran, and today I continue with the next in my series on the Ganga Dynasty, Part 6, the years after Sripurusha, the rise of the Rashtrakutas, and the dreaded Battle of Navasari. With the story so far. In the previous episode, Part 5, I left you towards the end of the reign of Sripurusha, which many call the most prosperous period of the Ganga rule. So here we are, in 788 AD. Things changed after Sripurusha. Despite brief flashes of glory, all evidence suggests that this was the beginning of the tale of the Gangas. This was also the time that the politics of the Gangas, the Chalukyas, and the Rashtrakutas were inextricably linked, until the Cholas arrived, shook the tree, and became the new dominant rulers of the region, but that was not till a couple of centuries later. And this episode marks the beginning of our journey through that period. Some of the events we encounter have their own inset histories, who won what battle and when. And then there's the old maxim that history is written by the victor. And sometimes, seldom mercifully, records are contradictory. But I guess that's what makes unraveling these tangles so much more fun. Before I start any unraveling, I must say that this podcast was made possible by the generous corporate support of the Prestige Group. Building cities, one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. The year is 788 AD, and we begin with a pressing question: who crowned Sivamara II as king of the Gangas and a successor to Sripurusha? Inscriptions published in the editions of Indian Antiquary, a real potboiler of historical accounts, suggest that the Pallava king Nandivarman conducted the formalities at the coronation of Sivamara II. The timelines don't suit Nandivarman II being the one who did it, so the conclusion is that it was the prince, Nandivarman III, who was deputized to conduct the coronation. Whichever Nandivarman it was, the soap operatic twist to the tale is that the Pallavas were involved at all. The Pallavas had been sworn enemies of the Chalukyas, and by proxy, the Gangas. And the Gangas and the Chalukyas had fought many bloody battles over centuries, over generations, as we know from previous episodes. And now, almost quietly slipping into the historical records, is that the Pallavas were crowning Sivamara Ganga, something that suggests that they had become allies now. Well, they had, and this was necessary because the Rashtrakutas had now become more than an annoyance, and their aggression was growing by the hour. When the Rashtrakutas defeated the Chalukyas and became the new dominant rulers of the Deccan, the Gangas refused to become their vassals, and this led the Rashtrakutas to carry out repeated attacks on Ganga territories and assets. They never really succeeded, but that story will emerge. One such attack was the Battle for Hebbal, a Ganga-ruled town. The battle was described on an inscription called the Kittaya stone, named for the man who defended his town in that battle. And this inscription stone was unearthed and saved a few years ago and is now on display in Bangalore. Listen to my previous episode titled The Battles for Bangalore. It's all there. The Ganga's troubles with the Rashtrakutas was something that Sivamara II inherited and for the rest of his reign suffered. But as for fighting battles, Sivamara was not new to the game. The previous king Sripurusha had 4 sons: Sivamara, Vijayaditya, Siyagella, and Dugamara. Now we know from the previous episode that one of these sons, Siyagella, had fallen in the Battle of Kagamogiyur. And even though Sivamara was the oldest, there was still a fight for the throne. Dugamara, the youngest son, thought that he should be king, and he started a war to make it happen. Dugamara saw himself as a better leader than Sivamara, and maybe he was. Both brothers had plenty of experience because their father, Sripurusha, had appointed them as viceroys to different parts of the kingdom. So they had the experience and they had the battle worthiness. also each had a lot of supporters, and this creates personal fiefs, and when that happens, it creates personal ambitions, even if some of them are undue. So when Sripurusha died, Dugamara, who was then governor of Kuvalalnadu or Kolar, wanted the throne and decided to fight his brother for it. An intense war followed, but it was short. Local kings picked sides in this family battle, as they are known to do, and Sivamara got the backing of former enemies, the Pallavas, and their support was crucial and helped Sivamara defeat his brother Dugamara. One of these battles was inscribed on a stone dated back to 810 AD and found in the Challakere taluk, and the inscription reads, "Being angry at Dugamara rising up and suddenly establishing himself by force, entitled to the 5 big drums, favorite of the earth, Singapota Kali Nolambadi Arasa, being ordered by Perumanadi, placed the order on his head and marching upon him fought in the battle." The Perumanadi here was the ruling king of the Pallavas, Nandivarman II, and the Singapota Kali Nolambadi Arasa, who was ordered by Perumanadi to help Sivamara, was the leader of the Nolambas or Nolamba Pallavas, whose kingdom bordered the Gangas. And the reference to 5 drums is likely symbolic, indicating higher status and rank, such as the title would be. And thus, aided by his new pals, the Pallavas, Sivamara came to the throne of the Gangas. And in time, despite his entire reign pockmarked by battle following bloody battle, Sivamara was able to consolidate his position as the king of the Gangas. At this point, let's step back to take in a broader view of the political landscape. And when I say step back, I mean, from this point on, I will need to tell you the history of the Gangas in terms of what happened with the Rashtrakutas and then the fall of the Vatapi Chalukyas. So over the next few episodes, I will talk about all those events that directly affected the Gangas, which, therefore, affected the centuries leading up to the creation of Bangalore. And I'll return to the Gangas soon enough. And this brings us to the story of the rise of the Rashtrakuta, Dantidurga. We slip back another half century in time to about 750 AD. In fact, let's rewind that tape a little more, to around 730 AD, and we come across this young man, Dantidurga, the king of an up-and-coming kingdom, the Rashtrakutas. The Rashtrakutas were a feudatory of the Vatapi Chalukyas, and they had their capital in Manyaketa, which is in present-day Kalaburgi, formerly Gulbarga. Further northwest of Manyaketa were territories that were ruled by the Chalukyas. Now, although the Chalukyas were headquartered in Vatapi, or Badami, their kingdom extended far north, right into parts of present-day Maharashtra and South Gujarat, then called Lata. Viceroys from the family and feudatories were appointed to rule and defend these territories. Sometime after 650 AD, Vikramaditya I sent his brother Darashreya Jayasamavarman as the governor or viceroy of the northwestern Chalukya territories. With some tribulations, including a battle with the Vajjada, Darashreya consolidated his position as the ruler of the Gujarat Chalukyas. Now, as a Chalukya viceroy, he would have had access to Chalukya assets, and that included the Rashtrakutas, who were located not too far away, due south, in the northeastern part of the Deccan kingdom. And the head of that clan, Dantidurga, was barely past his teens when he took over the responsibilities of king. But young or otherwise, Dantidurga was not only deeply ambitious, but importantly, knew how to go get it. His sense of vocation and strategy, and of converting opportunity to gain, was mature, years ahead of his time. At this point in history, there was another significant change to the politics of the region, and this was the arrival of foreign aggressors in the form of the Umayyad Dynasty, the Caliphate. We must note that the Deccan region was not without contact with the Middle East previously, as well as the great empires like the Greeks and the Romans and the Persians. But all interaction had been in the nature of trade, imports and exports, the cause of all that wealth in the Deccan. Of course, this would have included the exchange of cultural and religious ideas and information, And in the 8th century, the Christians had already been residents of South India for centuries, and Islam, which was around for the better part of 200 years, would have found its way into daily interaction through the Arabs and other traders from the Middle East, who have been visiting India since before the Christian era. And while aggression and the annexation of kingdoms for wealth and power was nothing new, it happened till now between ruling dynasties within the subcontinent, and the arrival of the Umayyad Caliphate was among the first of the overseas rulers who set foot on the soil looking for the share of this pie. Now let's understand that the Umayyad Caliphate was no opportunity-seeking adventurer. In his book with the not very prophetic title, The End of the Jihad State, Halith Blankenship writes, "The early Muslim state or caliphate, first centered in Al-Madinah, then in Syria, constituted one of the largest unitary empires in human history." He wasn't kidding. Stretching from Spain to China within a single century under a single caliph, this meteoric expansion of the Umayyads eclipsed the landmass of both the Romans and the Han empires. It was an impressive sprawl. At its largest, just over 11 million square kilometers. For comparison, present-day India is a little over 3 million square kilometers. The Umayyad crossed the Indus, battled the army of Raja Dahir, the ruler of Sindh. Their victory at Arur in 712 delivered to them virtually all of what is now Pakistan. And now, here they were, ensconced in the northwestern part of India. In their time, in the wake of this phenomenal expansion, the Caliphate successors faced waves of internal rebellion, which we would expect, and something that would plague them forever. But in 738, under the leadership of Junayd bin Abd al-Rahman, the Umayyad gained the initiative, launching offensives that pushed the frontiers of their empire south into the regions of present-day Gujarat and Rajasthan. This was not their first foray into India. They had annexed some territory a century before and lost some battles, but this time they were resolute in their efforts to stay and become a part of the economic, political, and cultural fabric of the land, just like so many foreigners had done before them. And having moved gainfully into the areas of Gujarat, they were now ready to expand, and they were boiling up to move south. They had set their sights on the riches of the Deccan. For those especially interested, there are some wonderful books that trace the history of the Umayyad and other caliphates, the subject of much academic study. Message or mail me and I will recommend some of what I have read. But back to politics and war. The Umayyad had sacked the Kutch and the Saurashtra regions, and they had crossed the banks of the river Mahi, which marked the northern boundary of the Chalukya Empire, sort of. A coalition of local kings fought the caliphate in a series of confrontations collectively called the Battle of Rajasthan. And of particular importance to us is the Battle of Navasari, which took place in 739 AD. When I come back, brace yourself for the Battle of Navasari and how the Arab Caliphate was defeated and how this battle lost them their mojo permanently. Right after this.
Just how the North Star is the guiding light, the star of North Bangalore, Prestige Camden Gardens, is a guiding light where your search for the perfect home ends. Prestige Camden Gardens, the star of North Bangalore. Step up to luxury with 3 and 4 BHK apartments on Tanisandra Main Road, 10 minutes from Manyata Tech Park, 25 minutes from the airport, and well connected with other parts of the city. Prestige Camden Gardens. Prices starting from 2.25 crore onwards. To know more, visit prestigeconstructions.com. RERA approved.
If the Umayyad Caliphate had been unchallenged and their advance unchecked, the history of the Deccan would have been substantially different today. They were no strangers to conducting campaigns on foreign soil, and all of their campaigns, from Spain to China, had been wildly successful. The wealthy nations of the Indian subcontinent, of course, were natural targets for their expansion plans across the world. At the same time that the Umayyad Caliphate was preparing the invasions towards the south into the Deccan, they were also currently in battle in Europe, thousands of miles away, and had embarked on the invasion of the countries in India at the same time. They were that big. At this point in history, the Chalukyas, who were the overlords of most of the south, definitely all of the Deccan, would have been their biggest rivals, and any battles in this region between them would not have been easy for either of them. Besides, this was the time that Vikramaditya II was in the throes of revenge, avenging his ancestor Pulakeshin II's death at the hands of the Pallava Nandivarman, and it was around then that Vikramaditya was also deeply engaged in one of his raids on the Pallava capital, Kanchipuram. An attack from the north by Arab forces would have been most inopportune for him at this time. So he ordered his cousin, then Viceroy in Gujarat, Pulakeshin II, not the famous Pulakeshin, to marshal his forces and thwart the advance of the Arabs. Now let's look at the belligerents. The strength of the Arab armies was based on a superior cavalry, and in their war strategy, their cavalrymen were everything. They were swift, they were experts in conducting lightning raids and outflanking enemy lines. The Chalukya armies were formidable on account of their use of elephants, hundreds of elephants. Horses versus elephants. The scene was set for a bloody battle. The Tajika forces, the Tajika being the Arabs as they were referred to in India, were headed by a general, Al-Hakim. They had made their way across the Indus. They had laid waste to large parts of Kutch and Saurashtra, and they had advanced hundreds of kilometers into Chalukya territory. Now, on their way past the river Mahi, they are said to have been defeated by Jayabhatta, the local king, according to some inscriptions, but clearly this was either not true or did not deter their progress. And they were headed right towards Navasari, which was close to Pulakeshi's capital. And the town of Navasari has, as its northern border, the Purna river. From Mahi to Purna is straight south, about 320 kilometers, and the Caliphate forces were making headway. But Pulakeshi was prepared. He had mustered his own coalition together, and this included the Pratihara Nagabhatta I of Malwa and the Rajasthan king Bappa Rawal of Mewar. Another very important member of Pulakeshin's forces was the Chalukya feudatory Dantidurga, king of the Rashtrakutas. But this battle would principally be a Chalukya show given the size and scale of that empire. Accompanying Al-Hakim was the standing army from his home base in Sindh, and dispatched to assist in the invasion of the Deccan were forces from Baghdad. On the day of the battle, the Chalukya coalition forces lay a distance from the south bank of the Purna, laying in anticipation for the Tajika to cross the river and commence the battle. But the Arabs were no strangers to the Gujarati coalition forces, as the local lads had repelled the Arabs no fewer than 3 times previously when they had attempted invasions from the sea route. And so the Gujarat coalition would have been apprehensive, but no more, no less than any other battle in any other circumstance. So, let's look at the armies of both sides again. The Caliphate forces were expert riders, and they had the best thoroughbreds at their command. They were adept at outflanking the enemy, and they were quick and fast riders. The Chalukya cavalrymen would have been no match for the Arabs in terms of cavalry skills, but they had something the Arabs would have great difficulty with: elephants. Battle elephants were a formidable weapon in the Chalukya arsenal, and by some accounts they brought 800 elephants to the Battle of Navasari. Now let's look at the lie of the land. There would have been dense foliage in Navasari, only natural considering that it was a riverside town, and this would have added to the Chalukya home turf advantage. Now normally in battles, a process-driven fighting force would have had to adapt to the narrow spaces available to them, either on account of dense or hilly terrain, and the Chalukya forces were able to circle the Tajika quite easily. By one account, the Chalukyan cavalry was used to slow down the main weapon of the Arabs, their cavalry, and while the Chalukyas advanced with a wall of elephants. Now those who have had the misfortune to be in the presence of an aggressive elephant trumpeting would know that for most men unused to this fearsome noise, their legs would first turn to stone and then to jelly. Defeated and humiliated, the Arab forces scattered. Al-Hakim was said to have escaped the battlefields, but the coalition forces hunted him down and killed him. The consequence of this defeat sent them back to Sindh, and the Indus River became a new natural boundary across which the Caliphate never crossed again. One scholar said of these many failed attempts at trying to invade India that the Caliphate would do very well to forget all about Al-Hind, advice they heeded for the next 300 years. While the Battle of Navasari has been recounted in so many dramatic ways, the only real record of this battle is a gruesome and gory account of it in the Navasari inscriptions that were written in the 15th Tithi of the bright fortnight of Kirtika in the year 490 Kalachuri. The date of the description of it on the inscription can be narrowed down to 21st October. Listen to the previous episode to know how this is done. And the Kalachuri year 490 can be translated to 739 AD. Now, why this date is significant is because unlike other inscriptions that are written decades or century after the event, this was written almost immediately after the Battle of Navasari, which increases its scope for accuracy. But nothing kept the inscription writers of those days from getting enthusiastic about describing bloodletting. And here are the lines from the inscription that describe the war. They're not exactly gentle and aesthetic, and several animals were hurt in the course of battle. But this is what was written. The army of the Tajikas, which poured forth arrows, javelins, and iron-headed clubs, which destroyed with its rapidly brandished and glittering swords the prosperous Saindava, Kachila, Saindara, Chabotaka, Maurya, Gurjara, and other kings, which, desiring to enter Dakshinapata with a view to vanquish all southern kings, came in the very first place to conquer the district of Navasarika, which rendered the regions between the quarters dusky with the dust of the ground raised by the hard and noisy hoofs of the galloping horses. The bodies of the murderers, in which appeared dreadful as the armors were reddened by very large streams of blood from the intestines which came out of the cavities of their big bellies as they impetuously rushed forth and were completely pierced by spearheads, which had not previously been vanquished even by the numerous eminent chiefs among hosts of kings who offered their heads in return for high honor and gifts that they had received from their lord, who opposed it, biting mercilessly both their lips with the tips of their teeth, who, though they were great warriors and had their sharp swords reddened by the mass of blood that flowed when the sides of the loins and the trunks of hostile elephants were rent on several extensive battlefields, could not attain success, who cut off the necks of their enemies' heads as though they were plucking the stalks of lotuses, hitting them with their horseshoe-shaped arrows which were quickly discharged for the destruction of their adversaries, whose bodies were covered with a coat of bristling hair on account of their martial spirit and excitement, was defeated. These words, if nothing else, ought to keep one from glorifying war for jingo or any other reason. And while many may choose to confuse this battle as something of a patriotic victory of Indian forces over a foreign enemy, these battles were really fought because the kings and the soldiers lived in a brutal time of kill or be killed, no matter who their foe. In the next episode, I will dive deeper into the history of the Gangas and the decline of the Chalukyas. But before I go, I'll leave you with a final stanza of the Navasari inscription, which poignantly captures the human side of the harsh travesty of war. And here goes. In the forefront of the battle, in which headless trunks begin a circular dance to the accompaniment of loud noise of drums beaten continuously in joy, caused, as it were, by the thought, today at least we have, by laying down our heads, paid off the debt we owed to our Lord in this one life. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.